Good afternoon. This is Julie Pavlik of Worldwide ERC, and thanks to everybody for standing by. Welcome to today's Worldwide ERC Learning Zone entitled, Who is Relocating Your Employees? How to Build a Better Supply Chain. I would like to take this opportunity to thank today's sponsors, CapRelo. Before we begin, please take a moment to review Worldwide ERC's webinar disclaimer. And now to review some housekeeping information. If you're experiencing technical difficulties joining this WebEx session today, please dial 866-779-3239. Email questions may be sent to support@webex.com. Our webinar today is being offered through a broadcast audio stream. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it online. To submit your questions, use the Q&A tab located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Simply click on the tab, type your question into the dialog box at the bottom of the screen, and then click the send button. Please note that all written questions selected during this webinar will be answered publicly. Today's webinar is eligible for 1 CRP and 1 GMS credit. If you hold your CRP and or GMS designations and would like to receive credit for this Learning Zone webinar, you must utilize the recertification credit form, which is available on Worldwide ERC's website in the Certified Relocation Professional section under Education and Training. Also, be on the lookout. You will be receiving an email later this afternoon that contains a short evaluation as well as a link to today's presentation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Chris Owens is the Director of Global Supply Chain at CapRelo. His role spans all aspects of CapRelo's global supplier network. He is responsible for managing supplier relationships that meet with their clients' business and relocation goals. Chris develops and maintains supplier relationships and maximizes value for clients by improving efficiencies and finding savings at every level of the supply chain. Chris has managed supplier networks in a number of multi-million-dollar industries, including hospitality, food and beverage, and textiles. He is a skilled negotiator and relationship manager, and he holds a degree in business administration from Salisbury University in Maryland. Brian Shea, GMS, is Vice President of Sales and Business Development at CapRelo. He leads CapRelo's business development efforts, including sales, product development, and representing the company within industry groups. In his management role, Brian is focused on creating personalized programs that make relocation easy across the entire process, for clients, for transferring employees, and for procurement managers. Having worked with well-known enterprises such as Kaiser Permanente, Sirius XM Satellite Radio, and Circuit City, Brian is focused on and results-driven. He holds a degree in business management and marketing from Keene State College in New Hampshire. Thank you for joining us, and I'm now going to turn the program over to Brian, who will start things off.
Great, and thank you very much, and we hope everybody had a great Labor Day weekend, and welcome to the fall. Well, the purpose of supply chain management is to establish, certify, select, and monitor all aspects of the supplier's capabilities. And whether you manage a network yourself or you're using a relocation management company, you'll need to understand the following components. First are your relocation needs, and that really determines what your supply chain requirements are. How to research and qualify potential suppliers, identifying the standards for selecting the suppliers, and identifying benchmarks for managing supplier performance. So as the point person for your company's relocation management, you have a responsibility to support corporate human capital business objectives, but as we all know, you're not a mover, or a real estate agent, or a property manager, or a lawyer, or an accountant, or a foreign language teacher. Let's face it, you're busy enough. You shouldn't be worrying how to sell a house or coordinate a move or managing inaccurate invoices or even shopping for temporary corporate housing. You need to be spending your time doing what you do best. So it's not about being an expert in the tactics of supply chain management. It's about being an expert in preventing relocation pitfalls that can impact your business drivers, or more importantly, issues that impact your transferees and their families. So the bottom line is your role is to ensure rigorous supply chain standards. I'd like to introduce Chris Owens. Chris?
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. So what happens if things don't go as planned? What is the impact to the organization if components of the relocation process does not happen seamlessly? Now, specifically, if a supplier does not execute and key relocation milestones are missed, would that be important to the organization if the transferee is not in place as planned? The transferee isn't at point B when needed, or experiences difficulties that distract from their core responsibilities. Will there be economic effects on the organization? Will this affect your transferee morale? So as you can imagine, all of these things are key components that at any point in the process, there could be significant situations that affect multiple aspects of this process. Going further, will you pay more? Think about it in terms of the fact that if there's additional costs involved, not only to fix the problem, to reschedule events, etc., refigure timelines, but what is the cost in terms of time? When something doesn't go as planned, what is the cost to you to have to problem solve and develop alternate solutions? Legally, are there legal risks associated with supply chain performance issues? So based on a contractual relationship, does the supplier have proper insurance coverage? Are you protected against negligence? Are you indemnified? Which basically is protected against damage or loss sustained. There are various expenses that are incurred throughout this, not to mention simply your risk as a third-party aspect in this process. You are at risk as well, and there is either direct or inferred costs that go beyond just simply paying more initially for a product or service. So, what do we want an effective supply chain to do? So based on the business goals of the organization, supply chain management will search for the ideal suppliers that qualify their capabilities, formalize a relationship that accomplishes the organization's objectives, and measure performance. That was a very long-winded speech to say, what do you hope your supply chain management to do? But it is important to kind of keep these in the back of your mind because, again, there's a lot of process, and what you'll see throughout this discussion is that they're all interconnected, interrelated. So, first, let's go ahead and talk about the suppliers themselves that will meet your goal. And I think that the header itself, finding suppliers is easy, selecting the right ones is the hard part. I think it's prophetic. While the golden age of technology brings the world to your computer, how easy is it to choose the right partners? And I think this graphic as well, places emphasis on partners. There are many components involved in relocation, and how many for each component or each category would be ideal. So these are all things that take into consideration when you want to make sure that you have the right supply chain management. So first, you want to research and qualify your suppliers. Researching suppliers will dig deep into qualifiable as well as subjective measurements, so you've identified your organization's relocation needs. But let me go through specifically things that you want to consider when you're doing this. Reliability. And a lot of these are fairly intuitive, but I think it's important to look at them in specific details. If in reliable suppliers, if they let you down, they let your employee down. And again, what is the risk to you and the transferee? Quality. Product, service, quality needs must be consistent. The transferee will associate poor quality with the policy or organization, not necessarily the supplier. Value for the money. As with most things in life, the lowest price does not always mean the best value. So the value of money is always going to be the balance between cost, reliability, quality, and service. Strong service and clear communications. What is the risk of an organization? What is the risk to the organization if this whole process doesn't happen on time? What if there's a catastrophic failure? there can be a cascading effect on the numerous pieces of the relocation process. So, you can understand the importance of a more collaborative relationship with suppliers will improve the speed and identify risks as quickly as possible so you have more time to recover from any kind of disruptions. More quickly that this can be done will bring better value to you and basically limit or minimize the exposure, especially if you're looking at the relocation process as a significant function of time. A hard start date, a hard stop date. Financial security. A recurring theme is risk to the organization and disruptions in supply chain. Financial security is another facet to reduce risk by confirming a supplier's revenue position, financial references, continuity plans, and third-party ratings. And I think finally in this section, then what's probably near and dear to my heart is partnership, the partnership aspect of your relationship with suppliers in the process. A strong relationship is beneficial for both sides. Working together results in lower costs, improved quality, and clear understanding of the capacities and capabilities of both. A mutually beneficial relationship is one that is high trust and high communication that creates and develops a strong and positive relationship and is the key to supply chain success. So as you go through this process, and you're going to hear me say this term a few times, is vetting. We love vetting in supply chain management. And then basically what it is, it's a main tool for us in supply chain management to ensure stability, resources, and expertise necessary to meet the relocation requirements for your organization. So the supplier background is key. We want to know in terms of what the type of company they are, if they're privately owned or publicly traded. Public companies have a greater degree of public records to draw from your research and comparison purposes. How long has the company been in business? And their core business culture, usually companies like to tout this. You can find this in a lot of different publications. They like to say this at every opportunity, but it's important because culturally speaking, it's something that you'd like to measure against your corporate culture. References and trade associations. This is a great resource for anecdotal references and their capabilities, as well as peer review. And I can tell you that's probably one of the most important things. How do your peers rate the specific suppliers? They're a great knowledge base, but they're also a significant and free-flowing piece of information to tell you how well they do or what experiences that they've had. Industry certifications. They instill confidence in meeting an industry standard, and in some cases validate their capabilities and generally evolve to ensure relevance. And what I mean by that is the very specifications or requirements for a supplier to be registered within their industry metrics for folks like WRC and SHPA, for example. They have to update those on a regular basis and have to meet their requirements. So that is a good indicator as to whether or not they comply with those general industry standards, and it's something as a supply chain management professional gives me a great resource to make sure that they're staying up to speed with those folks. A safety record, an example, U.S. Department of Transportation. And this is a specific example, but again, one of my recurring themes is risk mitigation. So if a key component of the transferee going from point A to point B is moving, and a key component of moving is the importance of their belongings, and you consider that as a mission-critical component of relocation. One of the things that you might look at as an example is in DOT, it kind of tells them what their accident records are. Or if a company specializes more in younger drivers versus more mature drivers. That accident record might be a component, albeit anecdotal, for you to choose or compare company A versus company B. So vetting your suppliers allow you to know the suppliers you want to do business with and reduce your vulnerability. Now, vetting continues from a financial review of potential suppliers, and there are a lot of great resources that are readily available for you, like your Dun & Bradstreet reports, and this provides a credit history and supplier operating performance. It's a great place to look at just from general financial performance that is publicly available, and it's a great starting point. State and federal corporate filings, This is looking at things to say if they file bankruptcy, for example, and understanding from an analytical data standpoint their scope and scale. Merchant manuals, again, another great resource that shows financial data for publicly listed companies. It's a great resource. Trading histories. This is basically, you talk about information from a peer review standpoint and other industry-specific metrics. And insurance coverage. Now, a lot of this information, believe it or not, you can actually pull from your suppliers. The suppliers understand what is necessary to be a part of your programs. They obviously want to put their best foot forward as much as they can. So obviously their strength and what builds confidence to the person that makes these purchasing decisions, that kind of stuff is very important, and they'll be very agreeable in sharing that information with you. Now, let me try to make some sense of all of this. So you've vetted your suppliers. Now what? After validating the potential suppliers you have, and you've gained a level of confidence that they can deliver to your requirements. Next, you will plot the potential suppliers so that basically you can do a side-by-side comparison of their scope and scale. Parallel, you can also start discussions around price components and other deal points that will allow for additional comparisons based on the supplier's value proposition. At this point, key stakeholder review and formal award can take place, and based on the supplier category, multiple awarded suppliers may be necessary. So this part is actually critical, and especially to get complete buy-in from your organization. And then finally, the business terms, they're finalized, memorialized in a contract and agreement, and can actually have very specific details that tie directly to your service components in terms of statements of work and service level agreements. So you've done all that, and it's, you basically feel pretty confident that you've vetted them, you've looked at them, you make sure you're comfortable with the suppliers. Is the final deal based on price alone, or are the partnership components and service deliverables really necessary for the ultimate success of the program? And I can tell you, and this from personal experience, that while these other components have their value, I think at the end of the day that the partnership and service components that you actually build in your deliverables can be more important in terms of the execution of your relocation program than simply the financial metrics saying that I get a better price from supplier A versus supplier B. So you beat these suppliers bloody. That's great. But can they sustain prices? That's something that you should ask for to make sure that you have that put together. So if, for example, if you're looking at the price point, which again, I don't want to minimize, but I think as you see there are other components that are important, but asking the specific questions about whether or not the pricing is sustainable. So if you get great prices in year one, higher prices in year two may not be of value to your organization if you were to do some net analysis. So that's a key factor in determining what you should look at when you're measuring the financial component, company A versus company B. Make sure the new relationship takes full advantage of their industry leadership. And you'd be surprised, again, the term partnership does take into consideration the value of the supplier's brand equity as well. And that can actually bring value and confidence to everything down to the transferee, for example, when they have confidence on a highly recognizable provider. So take full advantage of that. Make sure, too, on the fact when you're designing the service levels in the aspect, you can actually get specific on this. Tie components to the actionable items. I think that's critical. It's all well and good to say that I want, 98% customer satisfaction. But if you have nothing actionable against that, what does that mean? And I think that a lot of companies would actually be tasked when you put to them to say, great, how do you measure against that, and what kind of plan do you have in place to ensure that? You can also build in scenarios that can basically hold them financially accountable for that. Specifically, in previous contracts I've done, I was able to put in penalties if they did not maintain a level over some period of time. And these kind of components will, one, weed out the weak, And secondly, build a comfortable, and these are things that you can tout to your customers or your employees to say, why can we share with you not only is our policy sound, but the execution against that policy is dictated by the contract in terms of clearly definable, actionable service levels. So I think that's why I think these are very clear, and you should not be shy to ask for those components, and most suppliers would agree. And then finally, I think the key component here, I always say communicate, communicate, communicate. So if you have a clear channel that's directly with the decision makers, oh, and by the way, define the decision makers. Make sure they're in your contract, a clear example of who, at the end of the day, is responsible to deliver this program to your transferees. That person is on the hook and is accountable both from the organizational standpoint as well as the customers. And that physical presence will make sure that a lot of things get done and build confidence that there's a single point of reference or a group of people that are solely responsible for the service aspect of. And if you do that and develop it, that will definitely enhance that relationship as well as execute against your requirements. So, you've done all this hard work. It's paid off. You built a great supply chain. But wait, you're not done. Performance management ensures real results and quicker actions to continually improve performance. And I want to stress that for a moment. Is that again? It may be from a reaction standpoint that you've got even a high confidence of the supplier aspect of it. You have it memorialized in the contract. Does it go into a drawer? No, it is an ever-living document that is actually managed going forward so that you can not only extract the most value, but be able to adjust and change as the industry, as your business, or as innovation that the suppliers have to take full advantage of that partnership. And again, this isn't a one-way street simply saying that as the customer of the contract, it's a requirement. It benefits both in terms of cost savings and efficiencies to bring better value that at the end of the day, the transferee would actually benefit from that. So, managing the program, you want to do this in terms of regular reviews, all elements of the supplier service delivery, accounting, etc. Think of this as a frequent report card. Audits. Now, these are the more formal, and a lot of people will cringe against this, but at the same time, this is a more formal review of the supplier service, and it can be service delivery, not just financial. I talked about a moment ago to say if you have specific service components built into the contract, they are auditable metrics, and it is something, again, that you can actually use as a marketing piece for your ability to go back to your stakeholders to say this is the importance of a properly managed supply chain in terms of the success of the organization. This is a key tool to help you deliver that. And then this is something that, again, is validated by internal mechanisms that, has things that you can actually compare against the information that's provided by the supplier as well as your internal mechanisms. Systems. Much of the reporting function should be automated, and obviously for a quicker receipt and review, but I think it's probably more critical that if it is done on an automated basis, you have a much quicker turnaround for any kind of remediation that's required. And I think, as anything, time is money, and the ability, I'm a big fan of things going well, but as we all know, that doesn't always happen. In a lot of cases, from a supplier perspective, you can have a greater level of confidence in how quickly they resolve an issue. And that's actually something that, again, through automation, you can identify a problem more quickly and solve it more quickly. And then finally, formal reviews. Now, you might ask, how is this different from other scenarios of the report card or audits? This is a more face-to-face, regularly scheduled twice a year, once a year environment that, while it does look at historical data, how well we're doing, I think it's more important to use this aspect to get with the supplier from a partnership standpoint and look at it, how can we improve the relationship strategically? What does the supplier, what's happening in the industry that could cause problems that we can avoid? What does the supplier do differently from an innovative standpoint that can help us do what we do better? And that kind of interaction face-to-face is critical to the constant ongoing improvement of the relationship. So again, I have to stress that it is not simply, source, research source, award, and stick in a drawer. This is an ongoing process, and it is critical for the success of that relationship, which again means success of the organization. Now, there are some critical components within relocation that have, that speak to this exactly in terms of the service level agreements and statement of work. These are applications on the thing, and you can go ahead and click for these if you want. These actually will talk about the specific examples of key components in real estate that, that talk about the value of the final sales price to the broker's opinion, transferring employee satisfaction metrics, and listing date to contract pending date or close date. Now, there's a lot of information in that, but at the same time, these scenarios are very clearly defined, and then from an actionable standpoint, we use reports that will actually measure that so that we can find out if there's anything geographically that is causing issues that we have to address, if there's a consistent issue from a transferee standpoint that's not working the way it should be working. And this is probably, again, an example of very, very, down and dirty reporting so that we can make changes and react to scenarios to help, again, the end deliverable do it more than where it needs to be. Similarly with household goods movers, you look at the following components in terms of transferee satisfaction, delivery of paperwork to move management, and so forth. What's interesting about these is that while, a lot of these, maybe this is the ongoing management of supply chain, this kind of information is actually critical to the organization so that they can understand. Imagine the value to you to say as a critical component of the move, that transferee satisfaction through your managed program is at some level, a high level. That has value to you. That can be communicated to your employee base so that it could increase their confidence to want to make a move, or whatever the reasons are that are actually impactful to what you want to have happen as a part of the relocation. These may seem like down and dirty details, but the reason that I bring these up is so that you understand that what is the value to you to actually have successful metrics on these components, and how can you use them in the value proposition in your organization. And I think that's important. It's important to understand them, and at the very least, whoever you're working with, if this is something you're doing in-house or through a relocation management company or just managing it directly, these are key components that should be developed in your relationships and should be measured on a regular basis. It's really great information. Congratulations, we have a baby supply chain. That's fantastic. So think about what you've done. You've successfully qualified your suppliers, then again, qualified your suppliers against your organizational needs. And again, that's important because, again, that should be your benchmark. It's like the 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon. How do the supply chain metrics measure against what I'm hoping to deliver through my organizational relocation policy? And if it doesn't meet that criteria, then either understand the needs or have the supplier manage back towards that, because that's key. You can't deliver it if they're not doing exactly to your planned opportunity. You have great suppliers in place that will manage the relocation process. The critical part about all this is then you can you've made the level of confidence is high. You know what these guys are going to do. You have service metrics in place to make sure they do what you do, and regularly managed meetings to review performance. Now you can actually do the 14,000 other things you have to do every day. So regardless of doing this in-house or outsourcing relocation, these supply chain management attributes will ensure your performance standards and, again, meet your organizational goals. And then also, again, and this is something that on occasion is lost in the shuffle, is the experience of the transferee. This is all critical to these parts because at the end of the day, if they're not happy, they're calling you. If they're not happy, we're not able to deliver against something. And all the other success metrics that take place within the process itself have to happen. If it doesn't happen at ground zero, it's going to fail back up the chain. So now, don't forget, the best way to ensure supplier performance against your organization's goals, understand your needs. Clearly articulate those in every document that goes out in terms of your research or vetting and or even at the end of the day contract development with suppliers. Do your due diligence. The more rigor you apply to researching suppliers will help you meet your success goals and picking the right supplier. Be clear about expectations, both yours and your suppliers. Surprises after the fact are harder to correct. And then finally, transparency. Transparency is assurance. All aspects of a supplier's offerings and cost structure, as well as what is required from the supplier, needs to be easily understood, very clear, frank, and candid. The reason being is you've got to explain that elsewhere, up the chain, down the chain. You have to be able to communicate it, and if you can, or if there's a lot of complexity built in, it doesn't help anybody. And the beauty of this is suppliers understand that too, because that's their value proposition. And I think that's it. Yes, it is. So now if there's any questions, we can go ahead and answer them as a team here.
Yeah, we've had a couple questions come in as we've been talking. We've come up with some really good points, and thanks for that for Chris. One of the first questions that came in, which I thought was kind of interesting early on, Chris, in your presentation, was, finding suppliers. Do you just go online, or how do you find a good set of suppliers to do the kind of stuff you need in relocation?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mentioned earlier that the technology is great. Before, I saw a picture that was interesting to me. In the 80s, Google was this picture of encyclopedias. And now it's basically at a touch of a button you can find all this stuff. So it's a great resource, but we should be careful with that, because it's not, while you can throw a big net around that, and it's great, you can get a lot more done in a shorter period of time. Other things that I've said in bits and pieces through this is that trade publications are a good resource. Obviously, industry trade associations, there's a lot of information, good, bad, or indifferent, that you can pull from those folks. Again, this one is critical to me. Peers and other organizations. In a lot of cases, these avenues, if you work that way, will bypass the chaff and allow you to focus on suppliers that lead in their specific product or service categories. Also, I think at the other term, you can look at the resources to get anecdotal information. And I think anecdotal information in a lot of cases may have a greater weight, because these are people that have lived it, or near and dear to their heart. And I think at that time you can use a lot of the other more formal aspects to get the scope and scale for your overall review.
Okay, great answer. So we do have another question that came in online. So the question is, how do you research the financial security of suppliers in other countries, other than U.S., I would assume?
Well, there's, a lot of cases there are the same financial metrics that are used from a company based on where they've originated. If they have aspects, and most are global organizations, you can still use the same financial analysis that you do, or that you use in the U.S., for example, or North America through DMB and places, the other scenarios where you can pull the financial data. In terms of their physical scope and scale, that's probably information to actually reference international trade associations and try to pull detail from them specifically. And I think that would be done on a case-by-case basis, but I am not 100% familiar with, the financial reviews in other countries. And I think that you can also look at their annual reports, because they should break that down by countries that they work in.
Great. Another question came in that we had. So you had mentioned a couple times, Chris, about cost versus value. So how do you determine what the good value for the money the cost of the suppliers?
Well, again, there's a subjective analysis around that, and I think that while it's hard to put a dollar or cents around it, I think each individual person can determine, if you don't have to do something, if you don't have to manage an individual supplier, in terms of following up all the way through implementation, marketing, and actually deliverables, what is that value worth to you? And I think at the same time, if you're putting just for a specific example, and doing, examples with company-to-company comparisons, in a lot of cases, the companies themselves know what their competitive set is pricing their product or service at. And they want to be competitive in the market, as well as in any formal RFP process, they're going to put their best foot forward. So, and that's okay. In a lot of cases, to be perfectly honest with you, if I see somebody that's significantly less, I might question that. Because again, that goes back to my sustainable comment, whether they could sustain that price. Therefore, using subjective measurements to actually, you can do it as a simple 1 to 10 scorecard. You can actually say, okay, if all things are equal, but based on numbers of years in business, how many countries they serve, the amount of dedicated representation that they're putting towards this initiative, and other service components, if one is significantly different than the other, then that may sway you in the direction of one company versus another. So again, while it's hard for me to say, and I don't think I could give you a percentage difference on what the value of that is, and you can do weighting exercises, and I've done that, and that could be something that the stakeholders can have some input. What is the percentage importance of, having 10 dedicated representatives as a part of this program? And again, that's okay. You can put it as a high level or low level, it doesn't matter. And I think that will give you enough information to do a comparison that doesn't solely weight itself on the dollars and cents. I don't know if I answered that question.
I think you answered it. Yeah, thanks. Another question then is, just goes back to financial security and vetting and all of that, is what clues in a DMB report or really any financial information should you be looking for to show stability?
Well, a DMB is basically, what that's going to do for you, it's going to break down a company's financial history, so operating information, financials that can be used doing comparisons by companies or sectors, as well as the direct, how well do they pay on their bills. And that, while that's not the be-all, end-all, it'll give you again, from a risk mitigation or a confidence standpoint, that would help you, make some decisions about where they come in. Generally, credit reports, if you're just trying to determine whether they can manage your business. So the key points I take out of using a DMB is their overall scope and scale. What is their annual volume? Because you should make a determination to say, my business equates to some value. What percentage of the company's, would that be of the company's volume? And if it's a significantly high number, you might want to question whether or not it makes sense to put all your eggs in that basket, because you want, while that can actually work to your value, at the same time you might want to be careful of that, and it's just again another indicator of where you want to be, and making sure a company from publicly placed financial standards to let you know where they stand, both in terms of volume, scope, and scale, how long they've been in business, and whether or not they pay their bills on time.
Just as a follow-up, does bankruptcy or previous bankruptcies have any role in that, and is that something you should be concerned about?
I think you should note it. I don't think it's a death knell. It really depends on how long after their bankruptcy, what kind of bankruptcy protection, and then two, how long have they been relevant or viable after that bankruptcy declaration. I don't think, I would be hesitant to necessarily, but if you have two companies that are very similar in all aspects and you have a slight lack of confidence because of that, then that's okay. That's a decision make. But that's what I'm saying. One of the things, it's okay to have a gut check on a lot of this stuff. And all of these things throughout financial analysis, as well as, pulling information from all different aspects is just to give your gut confidence as to what the supplier, will the supplier be able to work, to manage your program.
Great. Another question, and we've been talking a lot about supply chains and managing them. This question is, my RMC, my relocation management company, already has a supply chain. Should I take the time to review all of the suppliers that they use, or, that's a lot of time. How do we do that?
I think that could be answered to say, spend the appropriate amount of time on whatever you would determine as your mission-critical categories. So, whatever they are, if they're responsible for a majority of your relocation business, or are the most complex, or have the most challenges associated with it, all of those might give you direction in terms of where you would apply your focus. I think that, those that have the greater impact in a relatively short period of time would probably have a higher priority than others that might be moving smoothly, or, an area that from an industry standpoint or other metrics you don't see would have a great impact to your business at the current time. So I think that is an ever moving target, but I think financially what it does to impact your business, or again, it's just something that's causing difficulties. These are ways, because again, you could have a lot of suppliers in this relocation world. You can have multiple suppliers by category. You got lots of categories. So I think that the amount of time an individual or individuals can spend on it is going to be limited to make sure you maximize their efficiencies as well.
Great. It looked like the flow of questions has slowed down a little bit, but we've got one last one here. So how do I make sure the rates of supplier quotes are sustainable? So if they signed a contract, don't they have to live with it?
That's an interesting question. Yes, but if they don't, what happens? Do they leave the contract, or you default them? So that's an interesting question, because in terms of the supply chain standpoint, the bidding process, again, one of my many overused statements is that they're going to put their best foot forward. So, and since the supplier presentation is going to have multiple components, and it goes back to, if you consider everything else the same, if something doesn't feel right, then ask the question. If they come in, for example, a lot less, why are you so much less? Because again, they should be able to answer that question and be right. Can you hold that for 2 years? Can you hold that for 5 years? So never be afraid to ask the hard questions, because not many suppliers are going to last long in any business by doing the what's the term I'm looking for? Loss leader. They're just not. It's never going to be sustainable if they have a certain margin that they have to live with to be successful in their own right. So again, this jumps around to many components. Partnership. The partnership includes their success. They cannot have success if they're just trying to buy the business. So if you can and you have assurances that they can sustain it, great. Then put components into it, maybe penalties, that will make sure that they do sustain. So I've done that before. Sometimes it's a knee-jerk. You're probably going to say, well, let's sit down and think about that for a moment.
That's great. Chris, I'd like to thank you for sharing your knowledge of supply chain, far more than my own. Thank you. And Brian also for getting it kicked off there to a good start. Julie, I assume you've got some couple more comments to make before we wrap up for good here?
I do. Thank you very much, Jim. And also, I'd like to piggyback on your thanks to Chris and Brian as well. That was a great amount of information. It was very helpful. So thanks again for sharing all that with us. And also a big thank you to CapRelo for sponsoring today's webinar. You've been a great audience. I'd also like to thank you for joining us, and to always remind you to keep an eye out on our website. We are constantly adding new Learning Zone webinars, and we certainly do enjoy you participating. So with that, I'd like to say thanks again to our speakers and to CapRelo. Thanks for our audience for participating. That's the end of our webinar, and everybody, you may now disconnect. Goodbye, and have a good afternoon.